So, I have a great idea, guys. How about we take one of our most expensive franchises we just bought and give it away for free on Game Pass? That's gonna make us a ton of money, right? Right? Oh!
Monster kill!
Stupid hoe.
I mean, I will just say it quickly. I do think it's funny because sure it was 2 years ago now, roundabout, was telling the Xbox people that Gamecast had nuked their, their favorite console, or the publisher in general. Well, maybe not the publisher because they're still owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft aren't going to go broke anytime soon. But they are very much an irrelevant part of Microsoft's plans for the future. To be honest, they don't really care about Xbox, so I do feel vindicated in being right, to be honest. Not that I take pleasure in seeing bad things happen in the gaming scene.
Oh boy, ladies and gentlemen, this is gonna get interesting. Let me ask you guys a question. What happens when the best deal in gaming suddenly becomes potentially the worst value right overnight? What happens when a service built on play everything for cheap turns into a $30 a month subscription and will probably go higher? And what happens when that $30 a month subscription still ends up losing money for the company that just raised the price to try to offset their losses? What happens when leadership finally admits that all of this just might be broken? Well, that's exactly where we're at right now with Xbox Game Pass, because we've seen massive price increases. We've seen a terrible decision to add Call of Duty to the mix, and developers are quietly turning against the platform, saying that they're basically losing money by putting their games on the platform. And now we have Xbox CEO Asha Sharma openly admitting that Game Pass has become too expensive for the players. That's not me saying that, that's them saying that. So today, we're going to be breaking down the full story of
Greedy. I mean, that's the best way I can summarize it. I don't want to maybe trivialize it too much or oversimplify it, but yeah, Microsoft got a bit greedy, didn't they? And now they're reaping they're reaping the repercussions of being so greedy.
About Game Pass, the rise of Game Pass, the slow and steady creep of the price hikes, the big mistake of adding Call of Duty to the mix costing Microsoft hundreds of millions of dollars, and why this entire model known as Game Pass just might be collapsing in real time right in front of us. Today, let's go over the entire history of Game Pass and whether or not these changes could potentially save the service as a whole.
Just say the link for this will be in the description if you want to watch this video without me talking over the top of it.
So hit that like button, subscribe button, all that good YouTube algorithm nonsense, and comment down below. Otherwise, your view's not going to count. To be honest with you, that kind of sucks. Today, let's talk about Game Pass. Well, we got to go all the way back, ladies and gentlemen, to 2017.
This will still be educational for me because I've always been on the PlayStation side and I've paid attention to what was happening with Game Pass to some degree, but become sort of disassociated with gaming as I've got a bit older. Recently I sold my PS5 and whatnot so I could get materials to put into this YouTube channel. So that's sort of where I'm at. So, but we'll let Hypnotic regale us with the history of the illustrious Xbox Game Pass.
Where Xbox Game Pass launched as a, at the time anyway, revolutionary idea. For about $9.99 a month, you get access to a library of video games. It was a very simple idea. And then Microsoft made a big move. They said all first-party games will launch day one on Game Pass. And that changed everything, ladies and gentlemen. Suddenly, you didn't need to buy games. You didn't need to wait for sales. You just subscribed and you played everything. And it worked. For a time, Game Pass exploded. 10 million users, 15 million users, 25 million users in just a few years. This was Xbox's comeback strategy. Not consoles, not...
Yeah, I mean, that, and I even think, even on the PlayStation side, the games on Games on Gold on Xbox first, weren't it? But the PlayStation Plus titles we used to get were generally quite good. It were good value for money, I think, overall to begin with. And Xbox, obviously, where we are now, they got far too greedy with. I keep putting the price up to a point where it was, not really productive for most people. I think then that's what's happened with streaming services as well, like Netflix. And that's like, is that really worth it now? I think for most people, I'd suggest not personally, but let me know in the comments what you think.
Exclusives, subscriptions. But here's the catch. Even early on, Microsoft admitted something very important that everybody needs to understand. Game Pass wasn't meant to be profitable yet. Let that sink in. From the beginning, this was a loss leader, a long-term bet, a gamble. And just like all gambles, eventually the bill's gonna come due and you're probably not going to be on top. Now, fast forward a few years and suddenly things start changing.
Yeah, these morons, they always like just look quarter to quarter. Just as long as line goes up in like for the next quarterly announcement or whatever, all's good for them. They just sort of don't have to think too far down the line because they can always just leave that business and get a different job. I mean, even though I've never been in a position executive making decisions and whatnot at all, even at my stage where I've always been sort of at the bottom of the economic ladder, it's easy to move around and just get a different job if things go sideways on one job. I imagine they feel probably quite the same.
Game Pass evolves into core, standard, ultimate, more tiers, more confusion, and most importantly, higher prices. By 2025, we saw Game Pass Ultimate jump to $29.99 a month. That's a 50% increase from the previous pricing, and people noticed immediately. The entire value proposition of Game Pass was it's cheap. Now you take that away and you're left with just another subscription in a world where all you have are subscriptions. You know, we came from a time where cable, you subscribe to cable and you would get all these channels. Now you're subscribing to all.
One thing I did, which I suggest maybe other people do, is I cancelled loads of mine, like Netflix. I don't remember the other ones I cancelled now. I know I've cancelled Funimation, but that's because it got merged with Crunchyroll. But either way, I think I whittled it down to just having Amazon Prime, I think, because obviously I get free delivery as well. And then I had Duolingo, and I put time into practicing languages. And while I wouldn't say I'm quite fluent in any languages still, I've increased my knowledge of linguistics as a result of that, which arguably would not have occurred quite as much from these streaming services.
All these services and you still don't get everything. It's absolutely insane, man, what's happening. But again, things get worse from here. This is not just inflation. This was just the cost of doing business. This was directly tied to something else, something huge that was about to come our way. Then Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard. This is where I personally believe that they made their biggest mistake. Everybody kind of knew what was coming, but I still couldn't believe that it was actually coming, right? I still, to this day, cannot believe that Xbox, Microsoft thought by acquiring Activision Blizzard, let's take your biggest cash cow that people were trained literally mentally to buy every year and let's offer it for free on Game Pass. The decision till this day still blows my mind. That is the equivalent of renting out one of the hottest racing cars that you just bought, right? Imagine buying a Bugatti, and then after you buy the Bugatti, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna rent it out so that everybody can use it for free or something. It's just crazy, brother. What are we doing here? I don't understand. Xbox Game Pass never quite.
Yeah, suicidal move, I think, in the short to medium term. Obviously, like long term, we're never gonna play out. So, I do think it's quite interesting to see exactly what will happen from this point forward.
Made sense to me. I'll tell you this, it is great for the consumer, or at least it was anyway, because you could play literally all the day one games for a very, very small price. And if somebody doesn't care to actually own the games, then it actually works out very good for them. But here's what happens, just like with Uber, right? Uber had the strategy to undercut the entire market, get the market reliant on their service, and then raise the price little by little every year until you eventually hit profitability. It worked out for them. It's not quite working out for Microsoft and Xbox. But in any case, when Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard, we kind of all knew what was coming. Call of Duty, right? The biggest franchise in gaming at the time, or one of the biggest franchises, and Microsoft made a bold move, some would say reckless, and that would be me, decision to put Call of Duty on Game Pass day one. Sounds amazing, right? For players. Wrong, because here's what actually happened.
No, you think they could have just delayed it by at least a week or something, you know, like give like the developers like a good week of just getting genuine sales coming in before the, you know, everything gets distorted by it being released on Game Pass, and then maybe the actual developers not knowing exactly how well received their game is than it would have been if it's not on Game Pass day one. But feel free to let me know if I'm misguided in that assumption.
Instead of boosting revenue, it completely destroyed sales. According to some reports, Call of Duty's Game Pass release led to about $300 million in lost sales. $300 million. If you were to divide that by the amount that it costs per copy, you're talking about millions of copies lost, gone. Why? Because people didn't buy the game anymore. They just subscribe, and it gets worse. To offset those losses, analysts estimated Microsoft would have needed about 15 million new subscribers in just 1 month, but that didn't happen, not even close. So what do? You raise prices, and suddenly that supposed best deal in gaming? Well, that starts to look like a desperate attempt to plug potential financial leaks that were caused by putting Call of Duty on Game Pass day one. Call of Duty, I just want you guys to understand, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 lost about $300+ million by putting the game on Game Pass, right? Even over on Steam, it hit an all-time concurrent with all other Call of Duty games involved of about 300,000 players concurrently at the release of Black Ops 6, and that game still lost about $300 million going on Game Pass. Now let's look at Black Ops 7, where with all Call of Duty games involved, it only hit about 100,000 concurrent players on Steam. That is one-third of players on Steam. Now, I know I can already hear you in the comments. Steam numbers don't matter. I'm coping. Yeah, I understand you're coping. It's fine. Steam numbers don't matter. I get it. But what Steam does show is a pattern. 2/3 of players decided to leave Call of Duty.
I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding something here. The Steam numbers are relevant. They're not the maybe most important characteristic we might analyze, but they're not completely irrelevant, I would think, not in my personal opinion. But again, I don't know, maybe there's just some things contemplating here of being sort of away from the gaming scene for quite such a long time.
2/3. And if the first one, Black Ops 6, lost $300+ million being on Game Pass, what do you think happened to Black Ops 7 that had 1/3 of the sales on PC? God knows what happened on consoles, and it was still on Game Pass day one. I guarantee you that game lost a hell of a lot more than $300 million, which is eventually going to bring us to the decision that we're going to talk about later in this video about whether or not Call of Duty is going to remain on Game Pass when Asha Sharma makes her changes to the product. So here's the issue nobody wants to talk about, right? Game Pass doesn't just hurt competitors, it does indeed hurt Xbox. Xbox players have been trained for many years now to not buy video games, right? They have wanted Xbox players to get used to.
Yeah, I have that argument being put forward as well, and I do agree. You know, they have been conditioned now to not really go out and buy games. I think that's been the joke. Both, you know, Steam players and PlayStation owners have both dunked on the Xbox crowd for not buying games.
To Game Pass and to utilize the service and to make it a required thing as an Xbox player so that when they eventually raise the price, just like Uber, they could try to get profitability. But the problem is Uber doesn't cost as much as running Game Pass, right? Game Pass costs so much money. The amount of games that they cannibalize in order to put on that actual system is crazy. And the fact that they cannibalized Call of Duty, a video game where players were literally trained to buy the same game every fucking year, is insane. You already had guaranteed sales every year, and even though Call of Duty was going down little by little, it is nowhere near to the level when Microsoft actually owns it now. Why would you go buy Activision Blizzard just to put one of their biggest cash cows on your service? You're insane. I don't understand why anybody thought that that would ever be a good idea. It was very clear that you guys were going to lose a ton of money, and I know that you expected to make it up and microtransactions, I know that you couldn't wait to talk about how many players engaged, right? These are the people that like to go on Twitter and utilize players engaged metrics to try to show off how good their games are doing, when we all know most of their games that they talk about with players engaged are absolutely financial losers. But they want their little puppets to be able to say, oh my god, there's 10 million players engaged, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, we're all engaged. Yes, even though we're not paying a single dollar, we're all engaged. Yes, this is great. No, it's not great. You guys are getting absolutely wrecked out here, and it's pretty obvious. So they decided to take a video game where people were trained to buy the same thing every year and then break that training for the last 2 cycles, and they're probably going to end up having to go back to what they were initially supposed to do in the first place. But anyway, let's talk about how Game Pass, again, just doesn't hurt competitors, right? It hurts Xbox. The internal data showed that games on Game Pass can lose up to, and I'm not kidding, 80% of expected sales by going on Game Pass. 80.
Wow. That is quite horrendous, to be honest. Yeah, that is a big goofball decision.
80%. Think about that. You're putting your biggest games on a subscription service and destroying your own revenue streams. This is the Netflix problem. When everything is included, nothing has value, and developers are starting to notice. Some have already said that the deals aren't good anymore. Funding is drying up. The model isn't sustainable, and now even Xbox leadership is admitting it. So this is where it brings
quite
us to the
relevant as
very
well, maybe having
interesting
the Eiffel Tower falling down as we discuss it at this point in the video. I'll leave this here for now, though. I'll let you continue with Hypnotic if you want. I'll leave the link in the description. Thank you for dropping by. I'll see you in the next video.